right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be joined by Minister Mike Ellis. He is our Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services and CEO of FearIsNotLove Kim Ruse. Keeping Albertans safe is one of the most important responsibilities of any government. When people feel unsafe in their homes, at work, or in their communities, nothing else matters quite as much. That's why our government has been focused on taking real, practical action to strengthen public safety. This includes investing over $19 million to ensure that both Edmonton and Calgary each have 50 new frontline police officers, because we know police presence matters to deter crime and ensure people are safe on our streets. I'm also proud to share that according to the most recent Statistics Canada report released in July of 2025, Alberta actually saw an 8.8% decrease in its crime severity index. This reduction was more than double the national decline of 4.1% seen across Canada during the same period. And I also wanted to highlight that since its inception in 2008, the Alberta Sheriff's Safer Communities and Neighbourhoods Unit, that's our SCAN team, has investigated more than 10,000 properties and issued more than 140 community safety orders to shut down drug houses. Our plan to keep our communities safe is working, but there is still much more that we need to do. That's why I'm proud to announce today, as part of Budget 2026, Alberta's government is investing more than $4 million over the next 3 years to expand our modern ankle bracelet electronic monitoring program. Electronic monitoring was introduced to address serious gaps in the federal bail system, gaps that have allowed repeat and high-risk offenders back into communities without sufficient oversight. These instances have occurred far too often, and frankly, Albertans have had enough. So rather than wait for federal action, Alberta chose to lead. In January 2025, we launched the electronic monitoring program to help hold high-risk offenders accountable. Since we launched, the electronic monitoring conditions have been imposed by the courts more than 550 times. At present, more than 300 individuals are actively monitored. Today's expansion builds on that foundation. With this investment, the victims of criminal acts will be able to receive alerts if an accused approaches a restricted location, such as a home or a workplace. That added awareness will give victims of crime greater confidence and help them make informed decisions about their safety. It also strengthens the ability of courts to impose and enforce meaningful release conditions. This expansion reflects our government's commitment to taking responsible, targeted action where it matters most. Budget 2026 is about disciplined choices, investing in programs that deliver real results for Albertans, programs that protect vulnerable people, programs that strengthen communities, and programs that help ensure Albertans can feel safe and secure at home, at work, and in their daily lives. Thank you, and I'll now hand it over to Minister Mike Ellis to share more details.
Well, thank you very much, Premier, and welcome everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, if Ottawa won't keep repeat offenders behind bars, then Alberta is going to find a way to keep those offenders in check. We're taking the guesswork out of the public safety. This isn't about offenders' rights. It's about a victim's right to live without looking over their shoulder. Budget 2026 provides new funding to expand electronic monitoring and introduce a victim-focused smartphone app that works directly with the ankle bracelets. The app creates a mobile exclusion zone around a victim, triggering alerts when the offender's ankle bracelet comes within a specified distance of the victim's smartphone. In my time as a law enforcement officer, I saw firsthand that victims go through when they learn that a person who harmed them may be back in the community. I've seen actual fear in the victim's eyes. And it's a fear that dictates where they shop, where they work, where they can even feel safe letting their children play in a park. And that fear doesn't just go away, it becomes a cage. And that's why timely, reliable information matters. It gives victims greater awareness, confidence, peace of mind. And that's why this technology is so vital. By creating a mobile exclusion zone that offers the victim, we are breaking that cage, and we're moving from a reactive system to a proactive one. If an offender crosses the line, the victim will get an immediate alert on their phone, giving them a precious seconds that they need in order to find safety, in order to call for help. This is about more than just monitoring. It's about giving a woman who is subjected to domestic abuse her life and her freedom back. As the Premier mentioned, this expansion helps address gaps left by the federal government because of Ottawa's broken bail system. We've all heard too many stories of repeat offenders being released and reoffending shortly thereafter. and we told Albertans that we would be doing everything possible within our provincial authority to improve public safety, and we meant it. And while the federal government has introduced bail reforms, it has not yet passed, and in the meantime, the impacts on their catch and release policies are being felt in communities right across Canada, and more specifically in the fields of domestic violence, and we are not going to sit idly by. So with this investment, repeat and high-risk offenders will be more closely supervised, and of course, electronic monitoring is just one tool in the public safety toolbox, and it is a program which is in high demand. It also give courts another option when setting bail or sentencing conditions, and Alberta's courts are already using it, ordering electronic monitoring in hundreds of cases. And as the Premier mentioned in some of the stats, since January of 2025, judges have ordered the tool over 560 times. I can tell you as of today, there are currently 300 individuals on electronic monitoring, and the funding announced today will expand that capacity for hundreds more individuals because of this demand. Alberta Correctional Services is preparing to launch the victim notification component of this, and this investment focuses on what matters to Albertans, protecting victims, especially victims of domestic abuse, and strengthening public safety. So for that, thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome Kim Ruse from FearIsNotLove to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Ellis. I am so grateful to be here today in support of this important step by the Government of Alberta to strengthen the tools available in our justice system to protect those at risk of violence. And at the same time, I wish this moment wasn't necessary. At FearIsNotLove, we work every day with women, men, and children who are living with domestic violence and with those who have used violence and who are trying to change. We believe that change is possible when there is accountability, support, and the right conditions. But we also know this, that not everyone is willing or able to change. And when that happens, the risk doesn't stay contained within a relationship. It actually moves outwards. Domestic violence is not a private issue. It is one of the most significant and preventable public safety issues that we face. We see it in our work every day at FearIsNotLove, in the escalation of control, the patterns of coercion, the use of technology to track and monitor, and the misuse of systems to exhaust and isolate victims. And we see it in community. Across Canada and internationally, mass casualty events are frequently rooted in a history of domestic violence. When we fail to intervene early and effectively, the consequences extend far beyond the home. They reach workplaces, they reach schools, and they reach entire communities. Yet too often, our systems still place the burden of safety on those who are being harmed. We ask victims to disappear, to change their phone numbers, their homes, their jobs, their emails, and their children's schools, to manage the risk that they did not create. We ask them to become architects of their own safety, while those causing harm are left with too few mechanisms to ensure accountability in real time. This imbalance is not just unfair, it is unsafe. Electronic monitoring begins to shift that. It does not replace the justice system, it does not eliminate the risk, but it introduces something that has been missing for far too long: a proactive, visible, and immediate layer of accountability. It gives victims critical information, it gives law enforcement another tool to intervene before harm escalates, and importantly, it reinforces a clear message that responsibility for safety sits with the person creating the risk. For those who are committed to changing their behavior, it can also serve as a structure that supports their accountability, and this is what meaningful public safety looks like. Not only responding after harm has occurred, but putting in place measures that reduce the likelihood of that harm in the very first place. We know what is at stake, we know the patterns, and we know that when we act earlier and more decisively, we can save lives. Today's announcement reflects that understanding. It's a step toward a system that holds offenders accountable, supports victims in living their lives more freely, and recognizes domestic violence and violence for what it is: a public safety issue that demands a public safety response. Thank you to the Premier and to Minister Ellis for their meaningful and tangible intervention today and your work towards creating safer communities. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll now head into our media Q&A. We'll start off here in the room before making our way to the phones. Reminder to state your name and outlet before asking your question. We'll be taking one question, one follow-up. We'll go to Connor, then to Lisa, then Janet.
Hey, Connor Hogg, CTV News. This is for Minister Ellis as well as the Premier. I'm looking for some more clarification on this. Exactly how much of the surveillance technology is going to be in the hands of people, victims of crimes, but who are also not law enforcement?
Well,
explain how the app works.
Yeah, so obviously there's an app that the victim will be able to download. Look at it as a bit of a proximity app, right? So obviously, I'm sorry if you don't know, this is what an ankle monitoring bracelet is. And so there will be a piece of technology in there that will be linking with that particular app. It's like anything. I know if we have a family member, some of our young kids, we want to make sure through an Apple phone, we want to make sure we know where they are. If they have an existing Apple phone, you have the same type of technology. So just remember that this is a tool we're providing to the law enforcement community, but most importantly, the judiciary, right? So there's a number of stakeholders that we have to continue to educate and have some further conversations with. For example, the judiciary, to make sure they understand what this app can do, what the proximity locations are going to do. Obviously, not just Fear is Not Love, but other stakeholders in this particular field to make sure that they understand this. Again, this is a tool and a valuable tool to give typically that woman that extra little bit of time to contact law enforcement. And, as I stated in some of the statistics, I mean, the pickup on this has been huge within the province, and we're only seeing greater use for this. And this is something that has been advocated, something that we've wanted to do actually from the very beginning, but we had to make sure that the right technology was in place. So I'm very, very excited about this, and this is something that will be happening this year.
Can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kim, maybe you could comment from a victim's perspective, because the obvious thing to me would be a spouse, children, probably in-laws would be the ones that would be most likely to want to be able to monitor. It's not going to be an app that anybody can follow around, but it's got to be reasonable proximity. But maybe you can tell us what you'll be advocating for, of who should have access to
Sure.
it.
I'll be advocating for safety of circle around victims so that there are people that they can notify as well, and so that it's not about surveillance necessarily of watching what everyone's doing, but it really is about giving victims back their lives. For so many families that we work with, if this would have been in place, they wouldn't be dealing with a homicide. And sometimes, well-intentioned law enforcement, we have all these protections in place, but ultimately if someone is wanting to cross that line and enter your physical space, there's nothing stopping them and nothing alerting people. So to me, this is actually a really important step forward to help us be able to put some of that power back in the hands of victims and their families so that they can create safety. It's not about taking away other people's rights, it's about creating that safety for themselves.
And we're good.
I guess I just need to ask for like a little more specifics on this. Like, is this going to be something where people can actually track, an offender in real time, or is this more of a situation where it's
a proximity alert, right?
Okay.
So if this is so just remember, I'm going to get into a law class here, but so the judge would make a court order for this device to be on the offender. And then he may put you cannot go within a certain number of meters or maybe kilometers from the victim. Okay? So just like a proximity alert, if that offender gets too close to that particular phone that individual has, an alarm will go off, notifying the victim, and then she should be contacting law enforcement. Okay? Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, super.
Thank you. We'll go to Lisa now and then to Janet.
Hi, thanks. Lisa Johnson with the Canadian Press. This is a little bit off topic, but yesterday, for the Premier, one of my colleagues asked your Justice Minister if he had been subject of an RCMP search warrant as the RCMP undergoes its investigation of AHS contracting. He said, quote, "The simple answer is no. There are no colleagues, counterparts, government ministers have been questioned by the RCMP at this time that I'm aware of," unquote. And I just want to clarify here. Have any of your ministers or your staff been subject to production orders by the RCMP in regards to this investigation?
As I understand it, the DM who was overseeing the Justice Raymond Wyant investigation has provided all the documents to both the Auditor General as well as to the RCMP. So you may want to contact DM Chris McPherson on that.
And on the documents issue, I wanted to ask as well, the Athana Mintzelopoulos court case had one of the central issues there is that the government lawyers have been arguing that certain privileged documents not be submitted. So I need to ask you, this is not a question about the court case per se, but government policy outside of it. You said that you're cooperating with investigations. Your Justice Minister said you're cooperating with all of the investigations. Does that include providing those privileged documents to the RCMP and the Auditor General? Are those privileged documents being released?
I don't know the answer to that. So as I mentioned, DM Chris McPherson was overseeing the documents acquisition from all of the various parties. I think they ended up with 2 million documents. And so he is also going to make available to the Auditor General as well as the RCMP any documents that they seek. So you'll have to ask him what has been sought. It's a one-step remove, so it's in his hands.
Thanks,
But you
Lisa.
haven't prohibited him from releasing those privileged documents?
I have no involvement in it. No, we set him up as an independent point of contact so that he would be able to correspond directly with the councils as well as with those who are seeking the information. Yeah.
Thanks. We'll go to Janet, and then we'll go to Radio Canada, then Will.
But just staying with the Premier and staying with the procurement investigation, so we know from the most recent addendum to Mr. Wyatt's report, AHS paid $49 million for medication that Alberta has not received.
Yeah.
So, I mean, your government at AHS gave MH Care so many chances to provide something in return for that money. Why has government waited so long to change tack to say now we're going to try and recoup some of this?
Well, once again, it's an AHS contract written by AHS, and it's up to them to determine the pathway. As I understand it, they were looking at one pathway to get an alternate product, and it appears that they have exhausted that avenue, and AHS is now looking at means to be able to recover the outstanding balance. But that is an AHS-led initiative.
And would you expect AHS to treat any vendor that way, to provide so many years of runway to provide a product that Albertans are paying for and not receiving?
Well, I would expect that contracts would be written in a way that if there was conflict of interest, that would be flagged. If there was, the legal counsel would sign off and give oversight. That if there were changes of vendors, that they would be notified. That if there was non-fulfillment of contract, there would be provisions written into the contract. There was a lot of sloppiness in how this contract was written, which is why we have now changed our process for strategic procurement to ensure that there's standardization on all of that. So we've accepted all 18 of the recommendations from Judge Wyatt and look forward to see if there's additional recommendations from the Auditor General when that report's released.
Thanks, Janet. And we'll come to Radio Canada. Yes.
Yes, I'm Alice Burga for Radio Canada. A question for Minister Mike Ellis about these high-risk offenders who are going to be monitored and more hundreds are going to be monitored. On which criteria are you defining these high-risk offenders? How are they going to be chosen?
Well, that's going to be determined by the court as to who is a high-risk offender. I mean, typically there's something known as primary, secondary, and tertiary grounds. So if there are concerns that somebody's not going to go to court, that's a factor that's taken into consideration. If there's a concern that somebody is a repeat offender, that's again something that's going to be taken into consideration. If there's a concern that the administration of justice might fall into disrepute, if that person is to be released, that's taken into consideration. Now, with the broken bail process that we currently have, again, this is a tool in the toolbox for the judiciary to use, and then the Crown will have to make an argument as to who is a high-risk offender and whether something like this would be deemed appropriate. So it's not necessarily a decision that I'm going to make. It will be a decision that the courts are going to make, and a case that is really going to have to be argued by the Crown prosecutor.
And my follow-up is for Premier Danielle Smith. So the agreement on methane has been reached with Ottawa. You have this target of 75% reduction by 2035. But we know that methane leaks are often underestimated. Previously, your environment minister told that you were going to rely on third parties' estimation. I was wondering where are you on this, and is it something you're going to?
Well, I think there's a couple of things I'd say. We had set a 75% target by 2035 in our 2023 emissions reduction and energy development plan. And we did that because working with industry, we felt that it was achievable. It's based on 2014 measures. So that was another key agreement that we got with the federal government. And they're deferring to our method for monitoring and giving credibility to those numbers, because I think that there have been some other reports that have been put out there kind of put us at odds. And so we want to make sure that we've got a common set of facts. And so we're glad to see that they're going to be taking our lead on identifying that. We have been using outside parties to assist us with developing out the tier pricing. I'll have to get you to follow up with our environment minister to see who they currently use to do this emissions monitoring and if that's going to change. But the agreement allows for us to come to an agreement that is 75% based on 2014 levels, and that we'll have a one truth of what that data looks like that will be led by the province.
Gotcha. We have time for a few more questions. We'll go to Will and then Sean, and then we'll go to the phones for our last questions.
Thanks. Will Vassar with the Western Standard. This is for Premier Smith. Yeah. Premier, since the outbreak of the Iran war, oil prices have consistently been around or above $90 a barrel. This has created gas prices to rise 25%, and the Canadian Taxpayer Federation has said this is causing hardship to families. So I guess the question would be, will you cut the Alberta fuel tax to lower prices 13 cents per litre to help Alberta families?
Well, we have a program that if prices are sustained for a period of time at an elevated rate, because we'll have revenues from another source, that's when we trigger our program to give those dollars back. Let's remember this has been elevated prices for a matter of weeks. We're still in last year's budget year, and I'll be waiting to. I think the finance minister has done the calculation, and based on the quarter that we're in, it doesn't trigger the program. Now that being said, there's lots of ways that we can address affordability. I mean, one of the most important things was we advocated against the federal carbon tax, and last year it was removed, and that's 17.6 cents per litre. That has already been taken off taxes, which I think is going to be important. We continue to. We also came through with our personal income tax cut, which is $750 to $1,500 per family, and it was foreseeing that there might be inflationary issues. To put it into perspective, of 55-litre fill, even if we did take the 13 cents a litre off immediately, that would save a family $7, and it would save them about $200 over the course of a year. So we think that the $1,500 tax break enables them to not only address those pressures, but any other pressures that might come. So we're going to continue to monitor it, and if there's additional remedies that we've got to put in place for those who might be suffering extreme hardship. We've done that in the past, and we'll have to see if there's more that we can do now. But no plan to change it for this quarter.
And then follow up, kind of along the same lines, the higher oil prices have undoubtedly had caused a boom for the Treasury in Alberta. I know you don't have the exact numbers yet for the quarter, but can you give us an estimate of how those higher prices have affected the deficit here in Alberta?
Well, let's keep in mind that we're still not done the 25-26 budget year. And Q3, we were looking at a $4.1 billion deficit. So if having elevated prices for 4 weeks, you kind of have to do the math on that. It's $700 per dollar over the course of an entire year. You'd have to prorate that on the basis of 4 weeks. Higher in some weeks, lower in others. So it may have had an impact of $1 billion or so. So we'd still be running a deficit for this year. And we haven't even started next budget year yet. So there's no impact on next budget year until we actually realize what those prices will be. They've been going all over the map. They were up above $100. Last I looked, they were down below 90. Not sure what it's, things change every 15 minutes. So I'm not sure what it is at this precise moment. But that's part of the reason why we can't set a policy that will be in place on 3 months on the basis of just looking at a shorter period of time. We want to make sure that we aren't putting ourselves in a position, because one of the things we did not want to do was cut important services. That's why when we were anticipating a budget that would have WTI average 60.5 for an entire year, we made sure to preserve healthcare spending, education spending, and all of our critical programs, because we knew that this was going to be a period of time potentially with lower prices that could have effects on job losses. We have a different problem now, that the higher prices, if sustained, could have an impact on affordability. So we're waiting to see how this ends up settling out. We're hoping it settles out fast. The long-term average price for oil up until a few weeks ago was expected to be around 60 to 65. So we just have to make sure that we're not making decisions today that are going to exacerbate the problem that we have around deficits.
Thank you. Time for a few more. We'll go to Sean, then we'll go to the phones.
Hi, Sean Amato with City News. Just a point of clarification for the minister, please. So you said that 300 people are wearing these bracelets, but then you said hundreds more will be wearing them and will be monitored. But then you said that the courts sort of sets the criteria there. So can you please explain that? And also, would the province like more Albertans, dangerous Albertans, to be wearing these things? Is that something that the province has the power to do?
Sean, we don't want violent repeat criminal offenders being released into the community in the first place. So this is a tool that we've had to use to think outside of the box for those people who have been released, who have committed crimes, again, after being released, and it's a tool in the toolbox. So yes, there are a certain amount of people that are using them. Hundreds, sure. You know what? It's something that is going to be available. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball as far as what the judge is going to do or not particularly do. But we want to make sure that we have the tools available. Has there been pressure in that from corrections, who runs that particular service, that could we use more money? Could we provide more services? Yes, exactly, right? So that's only just an estimation, something I think anybody needs to run with. Yeah.
I don't want a limitation on the number of bracelets available to be a limitation on the program. If the courts decide that they need more, then I'll be putting pressure on Mike to buy more, because we don't want that to be an arbitrary limitation. And maybe I'll get Kim to talk about from a victim's perspective. Sadly, there have been a lot of instances of domestic violence leading to death where the person didn't even have an ankle bracelet on. And so if there could have been an instance where a judge had this as a tool, because there was a risk that would have happened, I hope that there's no hesitation to defer on the side of safety. Do you want to comment on that?
I would say that we are in contact with many victims' families that wish that this would have been in place. I also have had calls from people myself that are afraid for their safety. And we're always cautious that the monitors, the bracelets, all the safety devices we use, we don't want it to create a false sense of security either. There's still a pressure in our society for victims to be taking and owning that safety piece. But this is a very important tool. We work with so many families that they just wish that this had been in place, and then maybe they wouldn't have to be advocating after the fact. Had a call from someone a few weeks ago where she was looking for services. She ended up on my phone on a weekend. And she was actually using her old devices, her old earbuds, to track her ex. And he came and he was supposed to not be anywhere near her, and he was out front. And so hung up the call. She called 911. They responded, and it was dealt with. So in a way, that's kind of what we're looking at, is giving another tool so that victims can actually own some of that process differently, and not just be guessing. And so I think at least the people that we work with are going to be very, very excited to see this come into play. And I really look forward to the day when I don't have to talk to families that have lost someone, when this could have actually helped.
Premier, I have to ask you one from my colleagues in Calgary. So it was revealed yesterday that the RCMP seized multiple devices from current and former members of Calgary City Council, including Jody Gondek. What are your thoughts on this situation? And when were you made aware that this was going to be happening?
I saw the news stories. I have no understanding of what it is about at all. And I would just say that we just have to wait for the process to play out. It's an active RCMP investigation, but I have no knowledge other than what I'm reading in the newspaper.
Are you shocked by this?
I'm just watching the process play out, just like everyone else, and we'll see if what the RCMP turns up.
Thank you. We'll head over to the phones now. Operator, could you put through our first caller, please?
First one is from Chris Barto from the Calgary Herald. Your line is now open.
Hi, this is a question for the Premier. Premier, at the CERAWeek conference earlier this week, you talked about the potential to build a new pipeline to the West Coast, and you also mentioned expanding capacity into the United States, and that it would give U.S. buyers priority, potentially first dibs on Canadian oil, and as well as that there's potential for new cross-border pipelines. Yep. From an Alberta perspective, which project do you want to see go ahead first?
Well, I'd love to see all of them go ahead. As you know, I put out a few years ago that we wanted to double our oil and gas production. I think at the time we were at 3.7. Now we're approaching 5. And if we get another 1.5 million barrels going to the West Coast and 1.5 million barrels going south, that would allow us to meet our target. I think the one that is likely to go ahead first and fastest is the Enbridge project, which is their expansion of their 400,000 barrel a day on their main line. The one that is likely to go ahead second is the Trans Mountain expansion, and they're doing a number of things to increase 360,000 barrels a day. Again, within short order, I think both of those projects would be within the next 2 years or 2 to 3 years or so. For a brand new build, I suspect the third one that is further along is the South Bow Bridger project, because Bridger is the pipeline company in the U.S. that would be partnered, as I understand, in their open season. They're already at 400,000 pledged barrels or more, and could go even higher if there's an interest. So that's normally how it works. You get gauge the level of interest, and that can help with the financing. And then we have a proposal that we'll put in the queue in June, hopefully for a positive decision from the Major Projects Office before the end of the year, which will start the 2-year clock on doing all of the consultations and environmental studies to get that to a point where potentially in the early part of the 2030s, that one could also go into service. So that's how I see the 4 big ones that I know about. That's how I see them likely being paced. And then I should say, and there's also other more substantial projects that Enbridge is talking about with partners that would also add a potential 1.5 million barrels by mid-2020, by the mid-2030s too. So what I found really interesting is that the Canadian pipeline companies are partnering with a number of American pipeline companies, which I think assists in helping the way through the regulatory process. And it seems to me that with the Energy Dominance Council, the Major Projects Office, and our new 120-day TS approval timeframe, I think everybody has an accelerated expectation of how quickly those projects can move along.
Just to follow up, Premier, given the fact that we've got CUSMA talks, which are going to be upcoming later this year, given the impact of any pipelines on the WCS, WTI price differential, and given the demand situation in Asia, which markets make more strategic sense to go ahead first, or does it matter?
To me, it doesn't matter, because one of the things that our companies have been very good at doing is finding pathways to get to Tidewater. So I discovered that Tourmaline and others have found a bit of a circuitous route to be able to get natural gas down to Louisiana so it can be exported. And so we already have Asian partners that are buying Canadian gas by being able to leverage some of the pathways that currently exist in the United States. It'd be nice if there were a few more direct routes, and we did a roundtable discussion with a number of counterparts where we made that case. So maybe there'll also be some gas egress. At the moment, I believe we've got 700,000 barrels per day that land on the Gulf Coast. A lot of our oil goes to Midwest refineries, and so it doesn't make it all the way to the Gulf Coast, but about 700,000 barrels do. And so that can also either be used for American purposes or can be shipped internationally. And that has also the ability to go to Europe one way, but you can go through the Panama Canal and get to Asia, and that's a 20 to 25 day route. That's part of the reason why it's so advantageous for us to have Trans Mountain, as well as for us to build a Northwest Coast pipeline, because that cuts that transit by 8 to 10 days. But our producers have found a way. They have found a way to be able to get our market international on the basis of the infrastructure that exists. And so if it turns out that having partners in the U.S. allow more of that product to get to the Gulf Coast so that it can either be used in the States or exported internationally, I think that benefits us. And then if it takes a little bit longer to get the West Coast pipeline, just on the basis that we're really just getting started, that's going to supercharge our ability to service that market.
Thank you. Operator, could you put forward our next caller, please?
The next one is from Jean Emmanuel from Radio Canada. Your line is now open.
Hi, the question is for Minister Ellis. Just a very quick question. I see you're wearing a special pin right now that you don't always wear. Can you explain the significance of that pin?
You always wear this. I think you need to watch the legislature.
But
what's your question?
Explain why you feel it's important.
Well, look, I mean, it's what the Premier and I have been very clear that we believe in a strong Alberta within a united Canada. I'm a Calgarian, I'm an Albertan, and I am a Canadian. And so I'm proud to let people know that I'm a proud Albertan and a proud Canadian.
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you can see his binder. It's got both on there too. You can see behind us. We do that all the time too. And what I would say is we are looking for partners so that we can get the country working the way it was always supposed to. As part of the reason why we partnered with Quebec and Ontario and Saskatchewan to ask for a new way of appointing judges to our superior courts is why we're in court today arguing that we have to be able to retain the power of the legislatures over unelected judges and preserve the right of us to be able to use the notwithstanding clause that was initially a Quebec action. So we find that there's a lot of common cause with our fellow provinces and a lot of frustration that the country isn't working as well as it should. But we believe that with these kind of incremental changes, we can get back to the spirit of the Constitution as it was written. That's part of the reason why we proudly support a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. Yeah. We have time for one last question. Operator, could you put through our next caller, please?
The next one is from Rick Bell from Post Media. Your line is now open.
Good afternoon, Premier. My first question is in your negotiations, which have not been completed, which may not be completed by April 1st, with Prime Minister Carney and his people, have you or your negotiators made it clear, crystal clear, what the political consequences would be if things don't start rolling on schedule? Because I think one of your advisors went on Twitter yesterday on X and talked about appreciating there was a healthy skepticism, but things are moving forward. But I think Albertans want to know that you've told Carney something, or your people have told Carney's people something as to the consequences if there's any ragging the puck or foot dragging on these major issues.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody is foot dragging. I know that officials flew out here last week to be meeting one-on-one with our officials, and that's kind of what happens when you get down to the wire, is that it requires hours and hours and hours in the same room together to go over each word. And so I assure you that work has been happening. And we're at a point now where the Prime Minister and I need to get together to just iron out our understanding of a couple of details around tier pricing and stringency, and I have impressed upon the Prime Minister that we've got to do it for April 1st. It'd be a great birthday present for me to do it on, and it won't be a joke when we issue the release on that. It'd be nice we would like to have that on April 1st, because in order to bring our third party in, which is that Oil Sands Alliance and their Pathways project, they need to know what the benchmarking and the pricing is first. So I would anticipate that the big agreement, and I've impressed this upon the Prime Minister, let's get that nailed by April the 1st so that we can finish in the following weeks the negotiation with Pathways. And that would put us pretty well on track. And then the final agreement we have to come to is the framework for adding nuclear to our power grid. We've just finished the consultation on that. I believe it's going to be released on March the 31st, the What We Heard report. And so that would be the one that we have to work on for the remainder of the year. But I'm optimistic. The Prime Minister got back to me. He shares the same sense of urgency that I do. And so we're, I guess, on March the 25th. So hopefully we'll be issuing a press release a week today.
And supplementary, following one of the other questions earlier in this press conference, because of course everybody hates high gas prices and everybody has an opinion about what to do about them. And you're saying you're not, the legislation governs what the legislation governs. So according to the legislation, when would there be some relief if the price continues to be high, if the price continues to be above over 80, I think $80 a barrel or whatever it is? When would the relief according to the law kick in? Mm-hmm. And what do you say to those people who say, don't worry about the law? Do a workaround of some kind. You're the government. Do a workaround and provide, in these very unusual circumstances, which is a war, that you would provide some relief, especially to those people for whom higher gas price really is a hardship.
Well, okay, I suppose we could play that out, and let's say there's a ceasefire tomorrow, and oil prices go back down to in the 60s range. Now we're entering a budget year where we already know we're going to face a $9.4 billion deficit with another $1.5 billion that is not going to be available to us. I guess we're just not prepared to take that risk. We haven't realized any surplus revenues for the next budget year, and that's the reason why the legislation is written the way it is that if there is additional revenues that come in, we want to be able to share those back with Albertans. But let's be clear, we haven't even started the next budget year at the moment. We still had a significant deficit that we were likely going to run this year because prices have been so low. So I'm more of the view that let's realize surpluses before we spend them, rather than let's hope that we have them and then end up putting yourself in a worse situation. So we'll monitor it to see if there are other things that we can do to address some of the affordability issues that people have. But the first opportunity would be June the 1st, because the period of time we'd be looking at monitoring would be March, April, May. I think that's how it works. Because we try to do it on July 1st. Pardon me. We do it on a quarterly basis. So it would be January to March is the period that we monitor in order to set the rates for April 1st, and then April to June would be the period we monitor to set it for July the 1st.
Thank you. And that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.